The first sound Bethany Davis heard in Whispering Pines was the frantic clang of the bank bell, a panicked metallic shriek that cut through the murmur of the town. She had been standing at the teller's window, the worn leather of her purse clutched in her hands, and the meager sum of her life savings freshly deposited. The teller, a young man with a nervous twitch, was just stamping her receipt when the bat-wing doors of the First Wyoming Bank burst open. 4 men, their faces hidden by grimy bandanas, stormed the lobby. They moved with a chilling efficiency, 2 fanning out to cover the half-dozen customers, while the other 2 vaulted over the teller's counter. The leader, a tall man with eyes the color of chipped slate, pointed a Colt revolver directly at Bethany. On the floor, he snarled, his voice a low growl. "All of you." The world dissolved into a chaos of screams and shuffling feet. Bethany dropped to the rough-hewn floorboards, the scent of dust and fear sharp in her nostrils. Beside her, a woman sobbed quietly. The air grew thick with the metallic click of gun hammers and the gruff commands of the robbers as they emptied cash drawers into canvas sacks. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The efficiency was brutal practiced. As they backed toward the door, sacks slung over their shoulders, the leader paused. His cold eyes found Bethany on the floor. He strode over, his spurs ringing against the wood, and stood directly above her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She expected a bullet, a final senseless act of violence. Instead, something small and heavy dropped beside her hand. It landed with a soft, metallic thud. He held her gaze for a second longer, a look of grim, unreadable purpose in his eyes, then turned and vanished through the doors. Hoofbeats thundered outside, fading into the dusty afternoon. For a long moment, no one moved. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier than the noise had been. Then slowly people began to stir, groaning, pushing themselves up. Bethany remained frozen, her eyes fixed on the object beside her hand. It was a silver pocket watch. The casing was intricately engraved with a pattern of interlocking leaves, a design she had traced with her finger 1,000 times as a child. The silver was tarnished with age and neglect, but she recognized it as surely as she recognized her own reflection. It was her father's. With a trembling hand, she reached out and picked it up. The cool weight of it in her palm was a shock, a tangible link to a man 3,000 miles away in a Philadelphia grave. The clasp was loose, just as it had always been. She pressed it, and the lid sprang open. The porcelain face was cracked and the hands frozen at 3:10. Her father, Daniel Davis, had died at 3:10 in the morning. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over her. Why, how her father had been a quiet man, a watchmaker who had never traveled west of the Ohio River. The watch had been on his bedside table the morning she had found him peaceful in his final sleep. She had packed it herself, a final memento, but the trunk containing it had been stolen from the stagecoach 2 days outside of Cheyenne. She had reported it, mourned its loss as the last connection to him, and moved on. And now, here it was, dropped at her feet by a violent bank robber in a town she had only just entered. The lead rider hadn't just dropped it. He had sought her out. He had placed it there for her to find. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And Bethany, alone in a strange town, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a ghost in her hand, had no idea what it meant. The sheriff's office in Whispering Pines was a cramped, sun-baked room that smelled of stale coffee-oiled leather and the ever-present Wyoming dust. Sheriff Tom Lucas, a man whose weary face seemed carved from the same rugged landscape as the territory itself, leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning in protest. He studied Bethany from under the brim of his hat, his eyes kind but assessing. "Let me get this straight, Miss Davis," he said, his voice a low, unhurried drawl. "You're saying the man who led the robbery, He walked right up to you and dropped this watch at your feet. He nudged the silver watch on his desk with a calloused finger. Yes, Sheriff. He looked directly at me. It was deliberate. Bethany insisted, her voice steadier than she felt. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, determined need for answers. And you're certain it belonged to your father, Daniel Davis? I'm positive. He was a watchmaker. He engraved the casing himself. See the tiny DD hidden in the scrollwork near the hinge, she pointed. Sheriff Lucas squinted, nodding in reluctant agreement. I'll be damned. So your trunk was stolen from the stage 2 days back, and the watch was inside. Along with everything else I owned. My clothes, my books, my mother's locket. The loss felt fresh again, a sharp pang in her chest. And you came to Whispering Pines to claim your late uncle's homestead, Thomas Davis. Bethany nodded. He passed last winter, I'm told. I only found out after I arrived. He was my father's only brother. His letters painted such a picture of this place. A new start. Her words trailed off the hope that had sustained her through the long journey, now seeming impossibly naive. The sheriff sighed, running a hand over his jaw. Thomas was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself mostly. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. This is a strange business, Miss Davis. Robbers aren't usually in the habit of returning stolen property, especially not in the middle of another crime. The door to the office creaked open, and a man stepped inside, sweeping a fine felt hat from his head. He was tall and impeccably dressed for a frontier town, with a charismatic smile and eyes that seemed to take in the entire room at a glance. Sheriff Lucas, the man said, his voice smooth and confident. I just heard the news about the bank. I came to see if there's anything I can do. Are my funds secure? Your money's safe, James, the sheriff replied, his tone respectful but not warm. They didn't get into the vault. This is James Hardin, Miss Davis. He owns the Double Diamond Ranch, biggest spread in the county. Hardin's smile turned to Bethany, and his expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. A pleasure, ma'am, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I understand you were inside during the robbery. A terrible ordeal. Are you harmed? I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Hardin, Bethany said, finding his polished charm slightly jarring after the raw violence of the robbery. I heard you're Thomas Davis's niece. Hardin continued, his gaze lingering on her. A terrible shame about your uncle. He was a good neighbor. If there is anything at all you need lodging supplies protection, you must not hesitate to ask. The Double Diamond is at your disposal. He positioned himself as a pillar of the community, a benevolent and powerful presence. That's very generous of you, Bethany murmured. Sheriff Lucas cleared his throat. Miss Davis has a more immediate problem. It seems the men who robbed the bank may be the same ones who stole her luggage a few days ago. He explained the strange incident with the pocket watch. Hardin's eyebrows rose in feigned astonishment. Incredible. What could it possibly mean? He looked from the watch to Bethany, a flicker of something calculation perhaps in his eyes. Well, I certainly hope you catch them, Sheriff. A town can't prosper with this sort of lawlessness. Miss Davis, please accept my deepest condolences for your troubles. Whispering Pines is a good town, I assure you. Don't let this welcome sour you on it. With another tip of his hat, Hardin departed, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and a sense of unease. Don't mind Hardin, the sheriff said, watching him go. He likes to be seen as the town's protector. Mostly he just protects his own interests. He picked up the watch again. So, your uncle was a friend of Nathan Zimmerman, you say? The name startled her. She had heard it whispered among the other witnesses at the bank. The name was spoken with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. I don't know. My uncle mentioned a neighbor named Nate in his letters, a good man who helped him with his herd. Is that him? That'd be him, Lucas confirmed. Lives reclusive-like out near your uncle's place. A bit of a loner. Some folks find him intense. War changed him, they say. The sheriff leaned forward. Look, Miss Davis, I don't have much to go on. A few masked riders, a returned watch. But it feels personal. It feels like this is all connected: your arrival, the watch, your uncle. You be careful out at that homestead. It's isolated territory. The town of Whispering Pines, with its dust-caked storefronts and the distant rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like the edge of a dangerous unknown world. Bethany clutched the silver watch in her hand. It wasn't just a memento anymore. It was a clue. And the first step to understanding it lay 5 miles out of town at a ransacked cabin that was supposed to have been her home. The trail to her uncle's homestead was little more than 2 ruts carved into the vast, rolling landscape. Bethany guided the horse and buckboard she had rented from the livery, her mind a whirlwind of questions. The sheriff's warning echoed in her ears, mingling with the unsettling memory of the robber's cold eyes and Hardin's too smooth condolences. As she crested a final rise, she saw a small log cabin nestled in a grove of aspens, a stone chimney standing sentinel at one end. A curl of smoke drifted from it, lazy in the late afternoon air. Someone was there. Her hand went instinctively to the small derringer the sheriff had insisted she take its unfamiliar weight, a cold comfort in her reticule. She brought the buckboard to a halt 100 yards from the cabin and approached on foot, her boots silent in the dusty soil. The front door was slightly ajar, revealing a splintered jamb. It had been forced. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The interior was in chaos. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out and emptied, and the contents of sacks of flour and beans were strewn across the floor. This was more than a simple burglary, and it was a violent, desperate search. A floorboard creaked in the corner. Bethany froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A man rose from behind an overturned table, and for a second she thought the robbers had returned. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered not just by the sun, but by a deep, abiding sadness. He moved with a quiet watchfulness, his eyes a startling shade of gray-blue, missing nothing. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and calm, but with an edge that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with. "This is my uncle's property." Thomas Davis. Bethany said, her voice shaking slightly as she raised the derringer. "Who are you?" The man's gaze fell to the small pistol, and a flicker of something not fear, but perhaps weary resignation crossed his face. "I'm Nathan Zimmerman. Thomas was my friend. I was checking on the place for him." He gestured to the wreckage. "Looks like I'm a little late." Bethany slowly lowered the gun, her initial fear giving way to a new wave of unease. This was the reclusive neighbor the man changed by war. "Did you do this?" He shook his head, his eyes meeting hers directly. "No, ma'am. I found it like this. Whoever they weren't common thieves. They were looking for something specific." He was right. A simple thief would have taken the cast-iron stove or the good set of tools hanging on the wall. Instead, they had torn the place apart, ripped open the mattress, ticking, even pried up floorboards. With no one else to trust, Bethany made a choice. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver watch. In town today, the bank was robbed. She began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. The leader of the gang dropped this at my feet. It was my father's. It was stolen 2 days ago. Nathan took a half-step closer, his guarded expression shifting to one of grim recognition as his eyes fell on the watch. He didn't need to take it. He knew it instantly. Daniel's watch, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The name of her father, spoken with such familiarity in this wrecked cabin, sent a shock through her. You knew my father? We served together, Nathan said, his gaze distant, haunted. A long time ago. He looked from the watch to the ransacked room, and a terrible understanding dawned on his face. This wasn't for you, Miss Davis. The robbery, the watch, this. He swept a hand at the destruction. It's a message, and it was intended for me. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she couldn't yet fully comprehend. Her arrival hadn't been a random misfortune. It had been a catalyst. She was a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a game that had started years ago in a war fought 1,000 miles away. A message from who she asked, her voice tight. Nathan's jaw hardened. From a man who believes I owe him a debt. He looked at her, then the weariness in his eyes replaced by a steely resolve. I don't know why they involved your father's memory in this, but I intend to find out. I knew your uncle, and I knew your father. They were good men. I won't let their names be used in this, whatever it is. He paused his offer, hanging in the tense air of the ruined cabin. I can't ask you to trust me, but I am the only one who can help you find answers. Bethany looked at the quiet, intense man before her, at the wreckage of her intended home, and at the silver watch in her hand. The world she had known was gone. The future she had planned was impossible. All that was left was this dangerous mystery, and this sad-eyed stranger who was somehow at the center of it all. All right, Mr. Zimmerman, she said, her voice clear and firm. Where do we begin? The first task was to make the cabin habitable. Nathan worked with a quiet, focused efficiency that Bethany found both impressive and calming. His actions spoke volumes where his words were few. He righted the heavy furniture, his movements economical and strong, and mended the splintered door jamb with a craftsman's precision. Bethany, refusing to be a passive victim, swept up the spilled flour and sorted through the mess, trying to salvage what little remained of her uncle's life. As they worked, a shadow fell across the newly repaired doorway. James Harden stood there, a basket of supplies in his hand, his charismatic smile firmly in place. Zimmerman Harden said, his eyes flicking from Nathan to the state of the cabin. I came by to check on Miss Davis. Heard she'd be heading out this way. Looks like you've had some trouble. We're handling it, Nathan replied, his tone flat and unwelcoming. He positioned himself slightly between Harden and Bethany. Harden's smile didn't falter. He stepped inside, placing the basket on the table. Nonsense. The whole town is concerned for Miss Davis's well-being. I brought some essentials. Bread, salted pork, coffee. The least a neighbor can do. He turned his full attention to Bethany, his voice dripping with solicitude. My dear, you can't possibly stay here in this state. My ranch has comfortable guest quarters. You'd be safe there. She's safe here, Nathan stated, his voice a low warning. Harden chuckled, a smooth, condescending sound. Always so quick to take offense, Nathan. I'm merely thinking of the lady's comfort and her safety. He leaned in conspiratorially toward Bethany. You must understand, Miss Davis, Mr. Zimmerman is a solitary man. The war left its mark on many of us, but some carry it more heavily than others. His reclusiveness, his intensity. It can be unsettling. People talk. He was planting seeds of doubt, painting Nathan's quiet resolve as instability, his grief as a sign of a dark past. Mr. Zimmerman has been nothing but a gentleman and a help to me, Bethany said, coolly, refusing to be drawn into Harden's web. Hardin's eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before the charming mask slipped back into place. Of course. A hero as always. The word was laced with a sarcasm so fine it was almost invisible. Well, my offer stands. If you find the isolation out here taxing, my door is always open. He gave Nathan a final challenging look before departing. The moment he was gone, the tension in the cabin eased. He thinks you're a fool, Nathan said, not looking at her as he began checking the windows. A frightened woman from the east he can manipulate. He is mistaken, Bethany said firmly. She watched Nathan's broad back, the careful way he examined the latches. This quiet man was a puzzle, but unlike Hardin's polished surface, she felt Nathan's depths were born of substance, not deception. Later that afternoon, as she was stacking salvaged tins on a shelf, her fingers brushed against a loose board at the back. Curious, she pried it open. Tucked inside the small cavity was a tin box heavy with dust. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were her uncle's journals. She opened the most recent one. The entries were mostly about the ranch weather cattle prices, the mending of fences. But as she flipped back, she found what the intruders must have been looking for. An entry from 6 months prior. October 12th. A letter from Daniel today. He worries. He writes again of that terrible misunderstanding during the War of the Shadows that still cling to his old comrades. He mentioned Hardin is out here, and Zimmerman too. He fears Hardin's ambition and long memory. Daniel wrote, "Some debts are never paid, Thomas. They are only passed on." He asked if I had a copy of the official report. I burned it years ago, as he asked. Some things are better left buried. Bethany's blood ran cold. Comrades. Her father, Nathan, and Hardin. They had all been there. Her uncle had known, and her father had been afraid. This wasn't just about a long-held grudge. It was about a secret one her uncle had died with, and one the intruders had failed to find. She looked over at Nathan, who was outside splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe, a steady counterpoint to her racing heart. He was part of that secret, and James Hardin was determined to unearth it no matter the cost. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm of repair and vigilance. Nathan helped Bethany secure the small herd of cattle her uncle had left their shared work, building a foundation of unspoken trust. He taught her how to mend a fence line, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he guided hers. In the evenings, they would sit in the quiet cabin, the air thick with questions neither of them was ready to ask. The pressure from Hardin escalated. It was subtle at first, designed to look like random acts of frontier misfortune. A section of their northern fence was cut, allowing a dozen head of cattle to wander off. They spent 2 grueling days tracking them. A week later, they found the water in their well fouled with kerosene, forcing them to haul water from the creek a half-mile away. "This is Hardin's work," Nathan said, his voice tight with fury, as he stared into the contaminated well. "These are the same tactics he used on the Miller family before he drove them out." "Can't you go to the sheriff?" Bethany asked, "and say that my fence was cut and my well was spoiled? There's no proof it was him. Hardin is clever. He always has someone else do his dirty work, and men who will keep their mouths shut for a handful of silver." Despite the growing danger, Bethany found herself drawing strength from Nathan's quiet resilience. He wasn't a man of easy comforts or effusive words, but his presence was a steady anchor in the storm that was gathering around them. She saw past the stoic exterior to the man beneath. One afternoon, she found him sketching in a small notebook, his pencil moving with a surprising grace. He was drawing the valley the way the late afternoon sun cast long shadows from the mountains. It was beautiful, imbued with a deep love for the very land Hardin was trying to take. He was embarrassed when he saw her watching, but he didn't hide the book. My father used to say that a man's character is revealed not in what he says, but in what he creates, she said softly, looking at the detailed drawing. A rare small smile touched Nathan's lips. Your father was a wise man. That night, driven by a need to understand the past that was so violently intruding on their present, Bethany returned to her father's pocket watch. She ran her thumb over the engraving, the familiar pattern a comfort. Her father had been a man of precision and secrets, a master of tiny hidden mechanisms. On a hunch, she pressed firmly on the center of the leafy scrollwork. A faint click echoed in the quiet room. A section of the engraved backing popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. It was not a locket for a portrait, but a space just large enough for a small folded piece of paper. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the brittle document. It was a fragment torn and yellowed of an official military report. The heading read, Preliminary Findings Regarding the Ambush at Carson's Creek, May 14th, 1864. Below 3 names were listed. First Lieutenant Nathan Zimmerman commanding, Sergeant James Hardin, Corporal Daniel Davis. The text was faded, but a few phrases were chillingly clear. Weeks, tactical retreat under heavy fire. Significant casualties. Inquiry into the loss of Private Samuel Hardin. Samuel Hardin, James Hardin's younger brother. Bethany looked up, her heart pounding. Nathan was sitting across the room cleaning his rifle, his expression lost in shadow. He had been in command. Hardin had been his sergeant. And her father, a simple corporal, had been there a witness to it all. She walked over to him and placed the fragile piece of paper on the table between them. Carson's Creek, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Tell me what happened. Nathan stared at the report as if it were a coiled snake. The color drained from his face, leaving his features stark and pale in the lamplight. He closed his eyes for a long moment, the silence stretching between them thick with the ghosts of the past. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, heavy with a grief that 15 years had not erased. It was a trap. He began, his eyes fixed on some distant, bloody memory. We were ordered to scout a railway pass. Intelligence was bad. We walked right into an ambush. It was a slaughter. He took a shaky breath. I gave the order to retreat. It was the only way to save what was left of the company. We had to leave our dead, and some of the wounded. He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with an agony she could feel in her own soul. Samuel Hardin, James's brother, he was one of the ones we couldn't get to. He was alive when we pulled back. James has never forgiven me for it. He believes I left his brother to die. He blames you, Bethany said, the pieces falling into place. He's blamed me every day for 15 years, Nathan confirmed, his voice hollow. He doesn't just want this land, Bethany. He wants to destroy everything I've built. He wants me to suffer the way he suffered. And now? He looked at her, and she understood. Now he sees you, a way to get to me, a weapon to use against me. Your father's daughter. The scope of Hardin's vendetta was terrifying. It wasn't about water rights or cattle. It was about a brother left behind on a battlefield, a wound that had festered into a poisonous, all-consuming hatred. And she was standing right in the middle of it. Hardin, sensing his subtle tactics, were failing to drive them apart, abandoned all pretense of neighborly concern. He rode into Whispering Pines and used his considerable influence to turn the town against Nathan. He paid 2 of his ranch hands to file a complaint with Sheriff Lucas, accusing Nathan of rustling a dozen head of Double Diamond cattle. They provided a detailed, convincing, and entirely false account. It's a lie, Tom, and you know it, Nathan said, standing in the sheriff's office, his hands clenched at his sides. I know you, Nate the sheriff said wearily. But they've got a story that holds together, and Hardin is whispering in every ear in town that you're a bitter, unstable veteran with a grudge. He's twisting your desire for privacy into proof of guilt. The town, once a place of potential, became a hostile territory for Bethany. When she went in for supplies, conversations would cease. She would feel the weight of suspicious stares. Hardin, meanwhile, played the part of the concerned gentleman to perfection. He would approach her in the general store, his voice full of sympathy. "Miss Davis, I am so sorry you've been caught up in this," he'd say loud enough for others to hear. "I tried to warn you about Zimmerman's dark nature. I've known for years he was capable of this, but I never imagined he would drag an innocent woman into his troubles." He began telling his own version of the Carsons Creek ambush, a carefully crafted lie that painted him as a hero who had tried desperately to save his brother, only to be thwarted by Nathan's cowardice. Zimmerman panicked under fire, he told a rapt audience at the saloon. He gave the order to run left, good men to die. My own brother. His voice would crack with manufactured grief. The poison spread. People chose sides. Bethany felt the isolation keenly. She was the outsider, the Eastern woman living with the town recluse, the accused cattle thief. Her dream of being the town teacher felt more distant than ever. One evening, returning from a ride to check on their own small herd, she found Nathan staring out at the sunset, his shoulders slumped with a weight that seemed too heavy for one man to bear. "Maybe you should go," he said, not turning to look at her. "Go to town. Stay at the hotel. Let Hardin see he hasn't driven you away. You can still have the life you came here for." Bethany walked up behind him and placed a hand on his arm. "And what about you?" "I've been on my own a long time. I can handle Hardin." "No," she said, her voice firm. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her gaze. "Hardin is wrong about what happened at Carsons Creek, and he is wrong about you. I will not let his lies drive me away. I'm not leaving you to face this alone." In that moment, her choice was made. This was no longer just his fight. It was theirs. The simple bond forged in shared labor and quiet companionship solidified into a true partnership, a silent vow to stand together against the storm. The look in Nathan's eyes was one of profound gratitude, a raw and vulnerable emotion that broke through his carefully constructed walls. He reached out his hand, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. But their decision, while strengthening their resolve, also placed them in mortal danger. They had chosen to fight, and Hardin was not a man who accepted defiance. The attack came at dawn. They were swift and silent, 3 of Hardin's men appearing as if from the earth itself. Nathan, ever vigilant, was already outside, and the fight was brutal and short. He managed to incapacitate 2 of them, but the third caught him from behind with the butt of a rifle. Bethany screamed, rushing from the cabin with her derringer, but a 4th man grabbed her from behind his arm, a steel band across her throat, and wrenched the gun from her hand. James Hardin emerged from the aspens, his face a mask of cold triumph. He knelt beside Nathan's unconscious form, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "He's not dead," Hardin said, looking up at Bethany. "I need him awake for what comes next." He rose and walked toward her. "You, my dear, have been a profound disappointment. I offered you my protection, a place in society. Instead, you chose this." He gestured with contempt at the humble cabin. A broken man on a worthless piece of rock. "You won't get away with this," Bethany spat, struggling against the man holding her. "Oh, I think I will," Hardin said smoothly. "By the time Sheriff Lucas finds you, he'll find a tragedy, a terrible mining accident." Nathan, in his grief and instability over being accused of rustling, came to the old Midnight Star mine. and you, his loyal companion, followed, trying to talk sense into him. The tunnels are notoriously unstable. A cave-in. Such a shame. I, of course, will lead the grieving search party. They dragged Nathan's body to a horse and tied him over the saddle. Bethany was forced onto another mount, her hands bound tightly in front of her. They rode hard for the mountains, climbing into the high country, where the air grew thin and cold. The Midnight Star Mine was a scar on the mountainside, a gaping maw of darkness framed by rotting timbers. The place was infamous in local lore, the site of a disaster a decade prior that had claimed the lives of 5 miners. It was a place of ghosts and bad memories, the perfect stage for Hardin's final act. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the only light coming from a few lanterns Hardin's men had lit. The beams danced off wet rock walls, creating grotesque, moving shadows. The drip of water was the only sound, a constant echoing metronome counting down the seconds. They dumped Nathan in a cavern deep within the mine, the main support beams ominously creaking overhead. As consciousness slowly returned to him, Hardin began his gloating monologue. "This is for Samuel Zimmerman," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "This is for leaving my brother to die in the mud while you saved yourself. You took everything from me that day. Now I'm returning the favor." He gestured to Bethany. "I'll kill you, and then I'll console the grieving widow. I'll take your land, your water, and even the woman who chose you over me. I will erase you." Nathan struggled to his feet, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. "You know that's not what happened, James." As they faced off a tense standoff in the flickering lantern light, Bethany's mind raced. She thought of the fragment of the report, of the words she had read over and over. She had been so focused on the names, she had almost missed it. The report, she said, her voice clear and loud, cutting through the tension. The preliminary report mentioned the time of the ambush. It was just after sunrise. Hardin frowned, annoyed by the interruption. What of it? "Your story," Bethany pressed on her mind, working furiously. "The one you tell in the saloon. You claim you saw Samuel fall and tried to go back for him, but Lieutenant Zimmerman ordered the retreat. But in my uncle's journal, he mentioned a letter from my father. My father wrote that he was with you on picket duty that morning before the ambush, a mile away from the main column." The lie was a desperate gamble, a shot in the dark, based on a half-remembered detail and a prayer. But it hit its mark. Hardin's face contorted, his carefully controlled facade cracking. "Your father was a drunk and a liar. He was your comrade," Bethany shot back. "He was there. If you were on picket duty, you couldn't have been with your brother when he fell. You weren't the hero trying to save him. You weren't even there." The truth, raw and ugly, finally erupted from Hardin in a furious roar. He wasn't a hero. He was a fool, a reckless boy trying to prove himself. He broke formation, disobeyed a direct order from Zimmerman, and charged a phantom noise in the trees. He's the one who triggered the ambush. He got them all killed. In his rage, he had confessed. The secret he had buried for 15 years, the shame that had fueled his all-consuming revenge, was finally out. His brother wasn't a martyr. He was the cause. Hardin's entire life, his entire vendetta was built on the lie he told himself to cover his family's shame. The confession shattered him. In that moment of distraction, Nathan lunged. The two men crashed together, a desperate struggle of fists and fury. A lantern was knocked over, its oil spilling and igniting in a flash of flame. The fight sent them reeling against one of the main support beams. The old wood already strained, groaned, and then cracked with a sound like a cannon shot. Dust and rock rained from the ceiling. "The mine is coming down," one of Hardin's men yelled, scrambling for the exit. A massive section of the ceiling gave way, a cascade of rock and earth, sealing the passage back to the entrance. Nathan pulled Bethany clear. just as a huge timber fell where she had been standing. They were trapped in the deeper part of the mine, Hardin and his remaining man on the other side of the collapse. They could hear his muffled screams of rage and terror, a sound that was slowly, horribly silenced by the groaning earth. He was sealed in the tomb he had chosen for them, buried by the very ground he had coveted. They emerged from the mine hours later, covered in dust and grime, following a narrow ventilation shaft that Nathan, with his knowledge of the local terrain, knew might offer a way out. They stumbled into the clear, bright sunlight of a new day, blinking like creatures born from the earth. Sheriff Lucas and a small posse found them on the trail back to the homestead. The sheriff didn't look surprised. One of Hardin's men came back to town babbling about a cave-in. Lucas explained, his eyes full of a quiet understanding. "Figured I might find you two up here. He's in my custody and singing like a canary." The evidence found at the mine entrance, combined with the ranch hand's confession, was more than enough. It cleared Nathan's name completely, exposing Hardin's plot and the years of lies that had fueled it. The town of Whispering Pines, quick to condemn, was just as quick to offer its apologies. Back at the cabin, the quiet felt like a blessing. The violence was over. The ghosts of Carson's Creek finally laid to rest. They sat at the small table, the silence between them comfortable, profound. For 15 years, Nathan said, his voice heavy with the weight of it all. I carried the guilt for Samuel's death, for all their deaths. I thought if I had just been a better officer, a better leader. Bethany reached across the table and took his hand. You did what you had to do to save your men. My father knew that. That's why he kept that report. It wasn't an accusation, Nathan. It was proof. Proof that you were a good commander in an impossible situation. He looked at their joined hands, then up at her, his gray-blue eyes clear for the first time since she had met him, free from the shadows of the past. He didn't need to speak. In his gaze she saw not just gratitude, but a promise of a future one they would build together, free from the debts of yesterday. A month later, spring had laid its gentle hand across the valley. The aspens were covered in new trembling leaves, and the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers. The town council of Whispering Pines had formally offered Bethany the teaching position. She accepted with the condition that she would make her home not in the small cottage behind the schoolhouse, but at the Zimmerman homestead. No one argued. On a sun-drenched afternoon, she and Nathan walked to the top of a small hill that overlooked their land. In her hand, Bethany held her father's silver pocket watch. It had been a message, a key, a terrible reminder. Now its purpose was served. Nathan dug a small hole at the base of a young sapling that was just beginning to take root. Bethany knelt and placed the watch inside. It wasn't a grave, but a foundation. They were burying the past, not to forget it, but to let it nourish the future. As they covered it with earth, a sense of peace settled over her. Walking back to the cabin, hand in hand, they saw the circuit mail rider dismounting at their gate. He handed Nathan a single stiff envelope addressed to Bethany. It was postmarked from Philadelphia, forwarded from the lawyer who had handled her father's estate. Inside was a letter, but not from the lawyer. The handwriting was her father's, elegant and precise. My dearest Bethany. It began. If you are reading this, it means you have made the journey west, and my greatest fear has come to pass. I have instructed my lawyer to send this only upon confirmation of your arrival in the Wyoming Territory. I have known for years of James Hardin's bitterness. He is a man hollowed out by grief and shame, and I feared he would one day seek to fill that emptiness with revenge against Nathan Zimmerman, a good and honorable man who has already paid too high a price for his service. I have enclosed a full account of what truly happened at Carson's Creek, a confession I should have made long ago. It exonerates Nathan completely. I was a coward then, afraid of Hardin's anger. But I will not let my silence endanger my friend or my daughter. I hope you have found Nathan. Trust him. He is the finest man I have ever known. Your journey was to find a new life, and my final prayer is that you have found it with him. Tears streamed down Bethany's cheeks as she read her father's last words. It was his final gift, a full confession, a blessing and a confirmation that her heart had led her true. She handed the letter to Nathan. He read it slowly, his expression one of awe and profound relief. A father's love reaching across death and distance to protect them both. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. The letter fluttered to the ground, its work done. They stood together on the porch of their home, looking out at the vast, beautiful, and unforgiving land that had tested them, broken them, and ultimately brought them together. The horizon was clear, the future unwritten, a shared promise stretching out before them.